Hey ho, let's go! Wishing all of you a happy Tuesday, everyone. Hope you're well wherever you are. Big show on tap today. I know my coffee cup is full, so we're ready to. I'm Sean Pugsley Martin. This is Pugsley's Pit. And as we always do, we begin each and every show asking you the question, where else would you rather be than right here, right now? By way of introduction, I'm a freelance sports writer for the Albany Times-Union, big-time sports enthusiast, a homer for my teams, sans apologies. I can also be found as co-host of M&M across the board on a weekly basis with my good friends Eric and Ashley. You can follow the show on Twitter at Pugsley's Pit and taking the podcast on YouTube, Apple, Spotify. Today's show, we got a big welcome to Dr. Tom Schaller, PhD, North Carolina, 1997. Former Little League baseball teammate of mine for the Price Greenleaf. I don't know what our nickname was, Tom, but Price Greenleaf way back in the day. I think it was 1978. Professor of political science at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Author of Common Enemies, Georgetown Basketball, Miami Football. Is a great read. And the Racial Revolution of College Sports. The Stronghold: How Republicans Capture Congress but Surrendered the White House. Whistling Past Dixie: How Democrats Can Win Without the South, and co-author of Devolution and Black State Legislators, Challenges and Choices in the 21st Century, a former political columnist for the Baltimore Sun. He has published commentaries in the New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, American Prospect. The list keeps going, folks. Politico, The New Republic, and has appeared on ABC News, MSNBC, The Colbert Report, National Public Radio, and C-SPAN. And since 2004, Dr. Schaller has given lectures on American elections in 21 countries on behalf of the U.S. State Department. And no, we're not here to talk politics, though we could. He is also, since I've known him, a lifetime Cleveland Browns fan. Yeah, does that face just kind of happen naturally?
Yeah, you wake up with that face when you're a Cleveland Browns fan. Though I am now a former Cleveland Browns fan, as I can confess to only a handful of people, and I think you were the first one, actually. Which is a good setup for where we're going today, right?
Where we're going. The Brownies. To me, this is going to turn into the worst business decision in the history of sports. You bring in Deshaun Watson. There's no secret to the baggage he brings. They knew, no caveat emptor here, man. You know what you're getting, and you know what the firestorm you're walking into. What do you think of the Browns just going into this before it's resolved? You alienate your quarterback, the former first-round pick of the draft. Now he's done there. What do you think of it's not so much that the Browns brought him in, but the way they've handled it from step one?
Well, to start with the second part of your question, I don't necessarily think it's a bad decision for the Browns to think beyond Baker Mayfield. I wasn't really crazy about his draft pick. I thought he wasn't a prototype NFL quarterback, that he was too small, that he was a great college quarterback, but maybe would struggle in the pro game. Of course, the Browns took him first. They could have had Josh Allen, one of just an endless series of bad management choices by the Browns over the last 35 years. So putting that part aside, that might have been the right decision to move on, but the way they moved on was clearly, in classic Browns fashion, a terrible decision in my view. Not just in terms of the dollar amount and the commitment to Watson, who I don't think has proven himself as worth that kind of money. Let's put that out there, holding aside all of the off the field problems that he's had and is having. I think it would have been a bad contract if he was, clean as a whistle, like, I'm blocking on his name now, the San Francisco quarterback who followed Joe Montana.
Steve Young.
Yeah, Steve Young, right, who's like about as clean as they get in terms of his personal background. I think it was a bad financial decision and long-term commitment to Watson if he was clean as a whistle. But he's not. And like you said, they knew exactly what they were getting into. It's not like they inked a contract and then these stories started flooding into the media. And in fact, some women have come forward after they signed him, but the vast majority of them and their complaints were filed before they signed him. I also just think it's just bad optics for the team and bad optics for the NFL. I mean, The NFL is trying to signal very strongly that it's cleaned up its act. And from Ray Rice on forward, it's clear that they have a double standard for certain kinds of behaviors. And we can get into Kaepernick later and so forth. But obviously, a peaceful protest is beyond the pale to the NFL leadership and its 32 owners. But you can beat your wife or girlfriend, and you can go to, massage parlors, even though you have professional masseuses hired by the team who really know what they're doing. But you can basically go and get rub and tugs, which is what we're talking about here, or try to get rub and tugs at, these spas in little flat malls, in various places where everybody sort of knows what's going on behind the curtain. And that's fine, even though what we're basically talking about is sex workers, oftentimes who are trafficked sex workers who are doing it involuntarily, have had their passports taken away from them or their ID taken away from them. So this is forced sex workers engaging in some of this. Now, did some of the women do it voluntarily because they were wowed by, giving a massage to a famous NFL celebrity? I'm sure a few women did. Or maybe wanted to try to date him or have a relationship with him, and that's fine if it's consensual. But when you get more than 24 complaints, there's a clear pattern there. And despite the defenders who say, well, the grand jury hasn't found any evidence, absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, right? And I think eventually what's going to happen is one of these cases is going to catch up with him. And then the Browns are going to have a big problem, not just on offense, but they're going to have a big legal problem too. And then therefore they're going to have a big financial management problem.
Yeah, look, before we get to the financial, all that money's guaranteed. You hope for the Browns' sake that they have a void in there somewhere. But look, nobody loves a good massage more than I do, okay? I had a great massage therapist. She moved to South Carolina a year ago, and I'm a mess. No is no. Okay, now, look, I don't know why a guy needs 66 different massage therapists all these years. I could try and figure it out without getting a confirmation on that. And it's odd. It's strange. I'm not going to go so far to say that he's got a disease or anything like that. He's got something going on that's not normal. Let's put it that way. I just can't figure out if you find a couple situations where you have a consensual spot, what the hell are you still looking around for? But the look is awful. Okay. And the NFL, and you brought up Ray Rice and those other guys, Tyreek Hill too. Adrian Peterson had an issue with his kids, and they dealt with him. But the NFL for too long has taken a blind eye, and I think the NFL has to look at this. And you have a growing base, near as I could tell, of female fans that Cleveland is just completely alienated. I like on the field. I'm a Deshaun Watson fan. There's very few quarterbacks that I would have taken over Derek Carr in the last few years, but there was some talk that he was maybe getting headed to Vegas last year before this whole thing blew up, and thank God he didn't. But that's just on the field. But I don't know how anybody could welcome this guy to the franchise knowing everything. Then you trade 3 number 1 picks and you give him $243 million, I think, guaranteed.
Guaranteed, yeah. What a terrible mistake. Well, on your first point, look, I'm not an expert in sexual predators and sexual violence, but from what I understand, it's the non-consensual aspect that is the turn on here, right? It's, this is a rich, young, relatively handsome guy. He could have a long list, and maybe he does have a long list of female suitors who are, jockeying for his attentions and want to be his girlfriend or partner or late night booty call hookup. And that's fine. He's a single man. He's entitled to do that with as many women singly or in group sex. He can be Magic Johnson of the NFL if he wants, right? As long as it's consensual sex with adults. But apparently, and we've seen this pattern with people like Robert Kraft, we've seen this pattern obviously with Jeffrey Epstein. It's forcing women to do things that they're uncomfortable with that I believe adds the added sexual enticement and excitement for them. It's the transgression that matters. It's getting women who aren't expecting you to turn over in your towel and you have an erection and so forth, and trying to negotiate to get them to do something they don't want to do. That brings the added aspect, that extra power dynamic that makes it particularly alluring for them. As I understand it, and again, I'm a political scientist. I'm not a social psychologist and not a student of sexual violence and so forth, but I, as a passive reader, apparently this is what's going on. And that suggests a deeper and more flawed individual than just somebody who's having a good time in his 20s, chasing skirts around Houston, right? Having said that, I think the guaranteed aspect of the contract, I mean, how can any NFL team, even with those 2 passes by the grand juries, have any kind of confidence in a long-term and really lucrative, and as you pointed out, a guaranteed contract for somebody where you don't know if you're looking at all of the iceberg when you sign him, or you're only looking at that 1/7 that's above the water. And given what we've learned in just a few months here, and the women that are coming forward, and as you said, the 67 or 68 people now that we've heard of in the New York Times piece, that may not be all of the iceberg, right? This could get up into the hundreds, right, at some point, because he's got a real pathology here.
I heard today there is a 25th lawsuit coming. They do expect it. And look, let's be fair. I'll play both sides, okay? It wouldn't shock me if some of these lawsuits are frivolous, people trying to jump on.
Sure.
But they're all saying the same story, okay?
Yeah.
And the other part about it is, for last I heard, the first 22, he offered him each $100,000, $2.2 million. Let's make it go away. Write you a check, sign an NDA, and this whole thing is over. And I don't blame him for trying to do that. Okay, look, you're making that much cabbage. You can stroke a few checks. You get out of it. You get on with your career. Nobody knows. You move on. But the fact that nobody took his money really, really speaks volumes here, right? Nobody took the payoff.
Right.
That to me is alarming. And then, and I have to go back and confirm it, but I'm pretty sure when I read that Watson contract with the Browns, the first year is only like $1 million, $1.5 million.
Right?
That's what I believe, and I'll go back and confirm it. But that's what I believe, because I think the Browns signed him. They wanted to get him his money and said, okay, but if you get suspended the first year, you only forfeit the first year's salary. And that's why it's potentially staggered that low. And again, I do want to confirm that, but I know I reviewed it and looked at it because it was in my head.
So in other words, the contract is constructed essentially conceding the Browns GM's fears that something was going to snap back on them.
Yes.
That's interesting. I didn't know that part of the contract.
Okay. So, and now let's get off Watson for a second. Could that be a reason why the Browns are playing hardball with moving on from Baker Mayfield? They may need a quarterback this year. I mean, I don't know how the league let him take the field. Shannon Sharp was on his show with Skip Bayless the other day, and they said, you know what, take the year off and try and get this stuff done, because you're looking at 25 lawsuits, not one lawsuit by 25 people, 25 lawsuits.
Right.
That's 25 court cases.
He quite potentially could be interrupted from the weekly practice regimen and pregame and travel because he's got to appear in court, and he may only have to appear for 30 minutes, but that's a flight in both directions, right? From Cleveland to Houston. What's that? Even if you take a private team plane, it's got to be a 3-hour flight in each direction, time to get there, time to land. That's a day, right? So, you know, if that day, you know, and judges aren't going to be like, well, let's accommodate. I mean, they might some cases, but they're not going to say like, well, okay, Friday's, you know, the final warm up and the run through, you know, for the team meeting before you get on the plane Saturday. So we'll let you come on Thursday. Maybe sometimes they will accommodate him, but sometimes they're going to be like, hey, you got to show up on Friday. Here's your court date. It's 10:30 on Friday Central Time. I don't care what you do for a living. You know, we'll put a warrant out for your arrest if you don't show up. And now suddenly the team is going through, you know, final video and final offensive strategy. And you got your offensive coordinator and your running backs coach and your wide receiver coach and your quarterback coach all in a room without your starting quarterback.
Yeah, hey, real quick, Deshaun Watson, first year of the contract, base salary $1.035 million. The next 4 years, $46 million a year.
That's really weird. So they must have an ethics clause in there somewhere, so that if he completely blows up this year, they eat the $1 million. And then they use the NFL's ethics clause to get out of the rest of it. So it's guaranteed, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, not guaranteed.
The way I took it was that they said, look, we expect you to get suspended the first year. So we're going to get you your money. And if you do lose that first year, you only lose $1 million. Maybe that's just me coming at it from a different perspective, that they're trying to appease him and do anything they could to get him to sign, because Cleveland was not his first choice. They had to go back.
So it still would be guaranteed even if he ends up getting suspended. He'd still get all the back end money. It's not really to protect the Browns. It's to protect him. That makes it even worse.
That's my view of it.
I mean, I'm not an expert on, player contracts and the business and finance of sports, so I don't feel confident enough to say. But if you're right and your instinct is that they structured the deal in such a way to give him greater guarantees and protections and fewer guarantees and protections for the Browns organization, then my view of it, which is already like below whale shit, is even, we have to go to another planet to get deeper to the hot liquid magma core of how bad this deal is, and not just on the optics, just on the finances of it. Yep. Jeez, what a terrible decision. And this is why I'm basically, after 40 years of rooting for this team, I'm ready for a divorce.
Is it
for me? Look, bad management decisions and making bad drafts, Tim Couch or whatever, that's one thing, right? Or, teams get injuries and they have other problems, and, you choose bad coaches who make strategic bad choices on the field. That's kind of forgivable. That's part of sports. But this was an open-eyed decision with relatively full information about what they were signing and what that contract was, and they did it anyway. Sorry.
Again, that's my view. I might not have the right angle, but I think they were so desperate to get Deshaun Watson and have him not go to New Orleans, not go to Atlanta, which were the other reported spots, that they said, look, we expect something to happen, right? But we're going to protect your money for year one.
By backloading.
That it is what it is, okay? They would do anything to get him. And what bothers me about it is you're still enabling somebody that I think is, from all appearance, has been enabled most of his life, to think that he could just go ahead and do all this stuff without any ramifications. It's a narcissistic thing, and they're just fueling it.
Well, as we very clearly learned, and certainly in the Trump era, we knew before that people in power, whether they're sports figures or they're media figures or they're politicians, some of them, not all of them, of course, do have this sense of that they're untouchable, right? And that pun intended here, right? But, that they are beyond the law at some degree. And it's true, right? Because justice is a commodity like anything else, and it has a price. And those who can afford, a battalion of PR agents and high-priced lawyers do get a different set of justice. I mean, say what you will about the most infamous case about sports and race and transgressions, the O.J. Simpson case. Whether you think he did it or not, you can't argue that the LA County District Attorney's Office didn't lose that case. They lost that case against a better qualified set of lawyers that OJ could afford that almost any other African-American male in the country could not. And Deshaun Watson will have that benefit. He will have really great lawyers and really great PR people on his side. And it's not irrational for him to think that he can get away with things that you and I would never get away with, Sean. Never.
I know from following Twitter that the reaction among the Browns fans has been horrifying, especially the females.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I don't know how as an organization you can trot that out. You'll see their Twitter base during minicamp. They show him like he's taking the field and all that. So I'm like, I don't know, that's just a scary thing. But you brought up Colin Kaepernick, blackballed from the league. We know we can say that because he received a financial settlement, him and Eric Reed, a few years ago. Terms undisclosed, but okay. Kaepernick had to work out with the Raiders. He's been out of the league for 6 years. And I'll give you full disclosure. When he first took a knee and started that, I wasn't happy about it. To me, my point was, look, your right to protest, your right to freedom of speech. I didn't like the flag being used as a symbol of that. I've had relatives in the war, different wars going back to World War II. So it really bothered me. But you know what? The difference now between 6 years ago with me, I got educated. I got educated on different circumstances and different things. And I still don't necessarily like somebody protesting anything with the American flag, but I understand why, because he did it to get everyone's attention, and boy, did he. Yeah. And he paid for his career. The fact that the Raiders brought him in for a workout, I thought was awesome. They haven't signed him, and I think if they were gonna, they probably would have by now. But we'll see what happens. But just talk about the difference between it. It's you have somebody potentially abusing, mistreating women, whatever, however you want to say it, and somebody who just did a silent protest.
Well, there's a few things there. Even though they've been widely reported, I think they're widely unrecognized or misunderstood. First of all, the NFL didn't used to have the players on the field for the national anthem. That followed 9/11 when the NFL, which was taking out ads for the U.S. Army and the military, encouraged the NFL to sort of ramp up its patriotic PR and front, with the flyovers and the flag and all this other stuff, what's called mobilization of bias by political scientists and me. Like me. And so, it used to be that players were in the locker room doing, final strategic decisions and warm-ups and getting themselves all gigged up and slapping each other on the helmets to get worked up to go onto the field. And the national anthem was something that was there for the public well in advance of the kickoff or the players coming out. I mean, there's the initial warm-ups and then they go in the locker rooms. You know what I'm talking about. But in that interregnum, when they go back in the locker room and do the sort of final strategic decisions and all that stuff, was when the national anthem used to be done. So there never used to be this expectation that players had to stand for the national anthem. I go to work every day. Nobody makes me say the national anthem or the Pledge of Allegiance before I start my day. You work for yourself, but ask how many of your friends have to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and or the national anthem and salute the flag at the start of their day. I mean, we do it with school children, but we don't do it at work. This is their job. This is their work. But we turned the NFL into this front piece for the expression of American patriotism. Then there's the other ironies like Tim Tebow kneeling, which apparently it's okay to kneel for Jesus, but not okay to kneel for people getting the Jesus beaten out of them by the police officers' salaries they pay. So there's all those other aspects, and I don't want to retread all of the Kaepernick stuff. But I think the fact that he's blackballed, even though he engaged in, like you said, a peaceful protest, which was, by the way, inspired by him talking to ex-military vets, including Green Berets. Him and Eric Reed talked to veterans who said, this is a polite way to respectfully, right? You're not turning your back. You're not doing, what John Carlos and those guys did with the black fist in '68 in the Mexico Olympics. It's a polite, reverent way of saying there's something wrong in this country. And anybody who thinks there's nothing wrong in this country, who watched the George Floyd video, now knows that whatever else you think about Kaepernick, he was right. I mean, he was dead on right about this political violence. And you may not like that he was the messenger for that. And you may not like him. And maybe you didn't like the Niners or something by extension. But the guy was right. And the NFL should be embracing people like him and distancing itself, Heismaning people like Deshaun Watson. But that shows you what the culture is in the NFL. It's a sick culture.
Yeah, let's take it a step further. Jack Del Rio got a $100,000 fine from his boss, Ron Rivera, the other day for his comments last week at a mini camp. Look, I'm no Jack Del Rio fan. He used to coach the Raiders. I think he was part of that team coming apart in 2017 when all this happened, when teams, I think it was the fourth weekend of the year, there were a lot of coordinated players taking the knee during those anthems. A lot of people banged on Derek Carr for standing up. Derek Carr's deeply religious. He's a man of his convictions. I respect his belief to hold any of his own beliefs. He's his own man. But when you really look at it and you start to check Jack Del Rio's Twitter byline the last few years, he just deleted his account the other day, you could see somebody with a right-wing philosophy, not one that I agree with. But the problem he had last week, you're entitled to your opinion. But Tucker Carlson went off on Ron Rivera. He called him, I can't remember what he called him for instituting that fine. But when you're wearing the shirt and a visor with the Washington Commanders with the backdrop, you're representing that organization. And I would have fired him for saying that, because don't go there. Okay. When you're representing, like my Twitter feed, I got suspended over the weekend for a tweet I sent at Jake Paul. Okay. But I'm self-employed. So now I'm a freelance writer for the newspaper I write for. So maybe I have to watch it. I think if they had a problem with anything I tweet, they would let me know and I would curtail it. But when you're representing an employer, that counts. That fine has to happen if you're the Washington organization. What do you think of that whole thing? Forget what he said, which was idiotic in my view, but how'd you think the way they handled it?
Well, first of all, to me, the greatest misconception about American government, and specifically the First Amendment, is that the First Amendment is a protection from the government. It's a freedom of speech. It's not really a civil right. It's a civil liberty. Civil liberties exist in the absence or restriction of government. Civil rights involve affirmative action by the government, like affirmative action programs or voting rights protections. And so it's a guarantee against government censorship. It's not a guarantee against your employees censoring you, right? People conflate the idea that I have free speech and that free speech should have no consequences. Well, freedom isn't free and free speech isn't consequence free. And Americans confuse government regulation of speech with private institution regulation of speech. And they also believe that if you believe that free speech is a marketplace, marketplaces have consequences too. There's that old line that religion without hell is like capitalism without bankruptcy. Well, freedom of speech in the marketplace, there should be consequences, and people who say stupid things should pay the price, just like a person who builds a shittier mousetrap should go out of business, right? I hope the language is okay, right? And so if you have bad ideas, you should have suffer the consequences of that. Now, the problem with the NFL, much like I wrote in the college book, it's a little bit different in the NFL. But as you move up the hierarchy in sports, from players to, say, position coaches to coordinators to head coaches to GMs to owners, it gets wider at every level, right? It gets wider at a level. Now, not all white NFL professionals or owners or GMs are racist. It's pretty clear to me that, and I don't pull any punches, that Jack Del Rio is a racist. And the thing about Jack Del Rio's racism, as opposed to, say, Richard Spencer, the neo-Nazis' racism, is if you talk to African Americans, and I've written a book with an African American, I have African American friends, they'll tell you in private moments, if they trust you, that they are far more comfortable with Richard Spencers of the world, who make very clear who they are and what they stand for and what they want and what they feel about minorities. They're far more fearful of the Jack Del Rios of the world because they're living and working among them. And they, for the most part, keep those attitudes private, even though those attitudes may express themselves in other ways that are discriminating, prejudicial. And Jack Del Rio, to me, is a much more dangerous person because he's in a position of power and he is trusted and he is validated in a way that a Richard Spencer, an obvious and nakedly and self-avowed racist, is not. And so when he says these things, it's not only that he's racist, it's that he's completely unaware of his racism. He's making a false equivalency between people who are protesting against violence, against the state, who Republicans and conservatives always say, we need to have our guns because of the tyranny of the state. Well, except for when that tyranny is waged against black motorists and black citizens who are pulled aside for broken headlights and then pulled out of their vehicles and beaten to a pulp. That's not tyranny, right? He doesn't recognize the racism in equating that with people who are trumping 2 miles from where I live here in Washington, D.C., complaining that the election, which has not been stolen from them, has been stolen as they're trying to steal it back, right? That is domestic terrorism. They keep calling it a riot or a protest. But let's be very clear. The government, the FBI, and the U.S. Code defines an act, a violent act motivated by a political principle or idea as terrorism, whether it's committed by people flying planes into building or people taking American flags and beating the crap out of U.S. Capitol Police. That's domestic terrorism. And to equate those protests and to say they're the same really shows a really dark blind side in a guy like Jack Del Rio. And I can guarantee you he's not the only person who holds a position of trust in the NFL who feels that way.
Oh, no. Yeah. The other thing with Del Rio, he apologized after getting hit with the fine without apologizing. Okay.
Right, of course.
Which really, it was a hollow apology, and it actually made me think even less of the guy.
Of course.
Because they must say, look, he apologized, you can fire whatever, however it's going to go, it's going to go. So he gave a bullshit apology with some hollow words. If you really stand by it, stand by your convictions, and stand up like Colin Kaepernick did, right?
I mean, if you start an apology for anyone who may have been offended, or if you were offended, first of all, you're saying, I'm not even apologizing to anybody. I'm only apologizing to those people who are, got their panties in a twist because they're easily offended. And, it's very conditional. It's very passive language, right? You just say, I offended people, period, and then apologize. So, these qualified apologies are, like you said, they're usually forced apologies because there's going to be consequences, and they're usually insincere. And I took his apology to be insincere, and I agree with you. I think he should have been canned.
Yeah. Hey, let's go back to the Browns for a second, right? Fan for 40 years. I got to bring this up. You knew it was coming. October 20, 1983. Was it, I looked up the date, was it the highlight of your 40 years in Cleveland? The Browns are beating New England 30-0.
That's
You're
right.
a senior in high school. I'm a freshman in college. We're there with a few friends. And all
Gillette
of a sudden,
Stadium, then, right? It's still Gillette Stadium. No, it's still
it was Schaefer Stadium.
Schaefer Stadium, right? Yeah, it was Schaefer Stadium.
And all you were doing, and this happened to me a few years later when the Raiders were there. All you were doing was enjoying your 30-0 lambasting, and next thing you know, all sorts of products from the refreshment stands are being rained down upon us. Do you remember that?
Oh, I remember it vividly. I basically turned around and was taunting, Patriots fans. And I learned a tough lesson there that, anytime you go as an away fan to any of the major East Coast, cities, whether it's Philadelphia, which has its own reputation, New York, Boston, to a lesser degree, the Atlantas and Washington, D.C.s, which are a little more tame, but certainly Baltimore, New York, the Eastern Amtrak corridor, and you're a visiting fan and you're touting that in some way beyond maybe just wearing your uniform, which is acceptable, your team's jersey, and you start getting into it. I'm not saying you deserve it, but you certainly invited it. And I invited myself to be escorted out of that stadium. And once we got to the parking lot, I believe you and Howard and our other friends said, you're lucky security came for you, because the outcome could have been a lot worse if you kept going and nobody saved you from yourself.
We did say that. Yes. It's like, okay, now we're out here. Fun's over, right? We're going to jump on the traffic. It's 30-0. It's okay.
Right.
But yeah, afterwards, I had a similar dust up in 85. I was in that same stadium. Lyle Alzado recovered a fumble for a touchdown right in front of us. And I was there with our old buddy from college, Mike, from high school too, your frat brother.
Mike Clark?
Yeah. And I started going wild and people got on me. And guess what? They're not going to throw out the hometown fans. They're going for the guy in the black jersey.
Of course. So, because you usually are the instigator, to be fair. I mean, hometown fans start fights too, but yeah.
There's a difference. And look, when you're the visiting team, that's why I can't stand all my teams. Nobody's around here. But yeah, when you're the visiting team, you're automatically in the wrong. There's a difference between taunting other fans and cheering for my team. But most security guards aren't going to go for that rationalization in the moment. They're going to remove you. I also had a dust up in Denver. I was in a game in 2000.
Dust up. That's not the right word to use. As Jack Barrel Del Rio. Learn, be careful.
All right, I'll find myself later. Left a Denver Monday night game in 2000, I think it was, and to get in Denver, and it snowed and a foot of snow the day before, and they didn't clear the stadium, so everybody there's famous that they were throwing ice balls at Charles Woodson, and I think Lincoln Kennedy back there. It got really bad, but I saw Raider fans getting hit all night, and I covered up my shirt with my coat. I didn't say a word. Took my hat off, and we were leaving the stadium, and I had put my hat back on, and I was there with my brother-in-law and my sister, and I heard "Kill the Raider fan." I just kept going. A chunk of ice whizzed by my head. I'm not talking about snowball. I'm talking about chunk of ice. It hit my sister, I think, in the shoulder, and I turn around, and it's just like, let's get the hell out of here, because it was a Monday night game that went to overtime, so it was late, and the beer taps were on all night. So it is a little crazy, but we were extricated safely and had a joyous ride home, if I recall. So
yeah, we used to love going to those Patriots games. It was the closest NFL team to Albany where we.
Well, they were so bad. You could get good seats on a moment's notice.
Tickets were cheap. Yeah, you could sit great, and I'm not sure the Browns have beaten the Patriots in Foxborough since 1983. If they have, it's probably only once or twice in 40 years. Sadly.
So what defines your search? We'll close with this: your search for a new team, fan free agency. What's going to be the determining factor there?
All right. So as I already confessed to you, I'm not really necessarily looking for a team, but as I told you, and I promised you, if the Raiders sign and he makes the roster, Colin Kaepernick, even if he doesn't take a single snap and he's third on the depth chart until he retires, and even if it's only for a year, I will become a Raiders fan for that act alone.
If going through your history, take a break after 85 or so. Don't go through the 90s. You can have a couple of years in the 2000s, but the late 2000s, don't even go through the Jamarcus Russell era on your side.
Wasn't there a stretch in the late not in the last 3 or 4 years, but in the decade before that, where the Browns and the Raiders literally had the worst records, were battling for who had the worst record over a decade period, from like 2005 to 2015 up through Hugh Jackson on the Browns side and whoever was coaching you guys. I think literally the Browns and the Raiders had the worst record in the most consecutive years without the playoffs of any team in the league, right?
We were good one year when Hugh Jackson was actually there. He almost had us in the playoffs. We had essentially a home playoff game against the Chargers the last week of the year, and the Chargers beat us. And I think we finished 7-9, would have been 8-8 in division winner. But yeah, it was just an ugly thing from 03 through 2015 for sure.
Yeah, pretty bad.
Taking Jamarcus Russell over Calvin Johnson.
Taking Baker Mayfield over Josh Allen is going to be remembered as a colossal error by the Browns manager.
All right. Hey, look, if people want to follow you on Twitter for your sports and your politics, how do they find you?
My last name, which has a C in it, SCHALLER67, which may or may not be my year of birth, Schaller67@gmail.com.
All right, buddy. Once again, common
Schaller67 at
enemies.
Twitter.
Georgetown Basketball, Miami Football, and the Racial Transformation of College Sports. It's a great read. I couldn't stand either of those teams, but it was interesting to go through. So, Tom, we're going to let you go. Enjoy your day.
All right. Great to see you.
Nothing going on in D.C. this week for you to pay attention to, right?
I'll be watching the hearings again tomorrow, and I think we have them, tomorrow and then Friday or something like that. Fascinating stuff.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time.
Great to be here, brother. See you soon.
All right. Be good. Dr. Tom Schaller, in the life of a Browns fan, former Browns fan, I don't blame him. Actions have consequences. It's just crazy things. Anyway, we'll go to my world. NBA. Oh, Boston. Dudes, take care of the basketball. My God. You open the game last night, Tatum drives the lane, kicks out, dishes the ball into the third row of the stands. The Celtics have been a maddening run through the finals. They've been resilient as all hell. Last night was their first back-to-back loss in the playoffs this year. Tough to watch. That said, I'm going to stick with them. I just think there's something about this team. I know Steph went 0 for 9 from 3 last night. LeBron's predicting a huge game 6 for him, and he may get it. But I think there's something about this Celtics team. I don't think they're dead. Talking with friends of mine that follow the team really closely, they're saying that the lack of experience for the Celtics in the postseason is really being exposed now against the Golden State core. Steph, Clay, and Draymond Green, who are accustomed to winning championships, and maybe so. Steve Kerr against a rookie coach, maybe that's showing. I'm not so sure. I'm going with the Celtics for sure in Game 6. I think they're going to rebound. Play their best game of the series, and then go out in Game 7. And you know what? You're going to know a Game 7 situation. Anything is possible. So I'm going to still stick with my Celtics in 7, and we'll see what happens. NHL Finals. Stanley Cup Finals starting tomorrow night. At the start of the year, I picked the Avs to win the Cup. At the start of the playoffs, I picked the Avs to win the Cup. Cale Makar has blossomed. He is maybe the best defenseman in the world now. He has been unbelievable in these playoffs. Nathan McKinnon, it's something to see. People in the East here where I am, you don't get to see the Avs too much, but they are something special. And though they were my preseason and pre-Stanley Cup pick, it pains me to go with Tampa. I hate Tampa. God, I'm so Tampa'd out. What bothers me about this matchup for the Avs, two things. One, the Lightning won 2 straight cups, and making long playoff runs haven't slowed them down. That's not an issue. The Avs goaltending has been a concern this whole playoff. They were so good on the front line and even back on the blue line, it didn't matter. I think it's going to matter now. I think Andrei Vasilevsky is the best goaltender in the world. It's all about postseason with this Avs team. The fact they finished 3rd in their division, who cares? It's those are what the great teams do. You get to if you're good enough and you're experienced enough, you navigate the regular season with a chance just to get into the playoffs. Because once you get into the playoffs, all bets are off. So I hope the Avs win. Can't stand the Lightning. I'm tired of them, but you got to respect them. They're a hell of a hockey team. Even on the back end, they're tough on the blood. Victor Hedman has been a fantastic NHL goalie for over 10 years now. Does he offset Makar? I don't know. He's not the same type of player, but his presence certainly does. And Stamkos and Kucherov and the rest. So it should be a great final. I'm going to pick Tampa in 7. Again, that pains the hell out of me more than you know. So should be fun. Let's sit back and watch. Until then, time for our shameless plug of the week. My book on Amazon, Letters from Daddy, Dear Liam and Noah, life lessons to my kids. Be turning 6 in the fall. Began writing it about 2 years ago about this time. So how time flies when you're having fun. That said, enjoy the rest of your week. At least one more night of the NBA Finals coming up, maybe 2. Stanley Cup Finals. And then we get into summer and then baseball. We start to focus heavily on the show on baseball very, very soon as we start to get into the All-Star game and then the dog games and MLB season. Have a great week. Talk to you soon. Bye.